And now, our feature contemplation.
Speaking of Cinema with Andrew Schwartz.
Hey folks, Andrew here. Thank you again for listening. So some unfortunate news, I have not been able to fix the audio issue that has been plaguing me since the last episode, Lost in Translation. So I am in contact with the service I use to record podcasts remotely right now to get that fixed as soon as possible. But please bear with me and excuse the inadequate audio on my end from this episode. I did not want to delay this episode or skip it because I want the constant flow of content coming to you. So, without further ado, I give you Network. Welcome to the Speaking Cinema podcast. I'm Andrew Schwartz, your host, and we're continuing with Season 2. And today, on the second episode of the season, we have an audacious, an incredible, groundbreaking classic film, and pretty much the perfect guest to talk about this with. Today, we are riding through the airwaves madly as hell with Sidney Lumet's 1976 movie, Network. So excited to welcome back our guest. He's been with us a couple times, and there's nothing that this guy can't break down and talk very intricately about, but especially this film, because I heard from a little birdie that this is in his top 3. And folks, for someone who's seen as many movies as this man has, and as just as many movies as he knows, that's quite something to say. So I'd love to invite back onto the podcast Adam Seccafico. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
You are meddling with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Schwartz, and I won't have it. Is that clear?
I think I've seen the face of God.
You just might have, Mr. Schwartz. It's funny. A couple years ago, they did a Broadway version of the show with Bryan Cranston playing Howard Beale.
Uh-huh.
And it was, look, by and large, because you don't fuck with perfection when it pertains to the script.
Right.
It was a pretty faithful adaptation, but they changed one thing, and they made Arthur Jensen literally God.
Oh, wow.
And that through because, look, I'm full disclosure, that Ned Beatty monologue is probably the best monologue in the history of film, in my opinion.
Wow.
And I will watch that thing once every month or so, just because I love watching great acting and listening to great writing.
Yeah.
But it messed with I don't know, it just messed with it, making him literally God. And, there'd be Cranston and he'd look up and got Arthur Jensen be walking out, from the top of the stage and doing the speech.
Right.
And then at the ending of it, after Max and Diane break up in the play, he appears to Diane and does this whole thing about, like, I don't know, the power of media or whatever the fuck. And it kind of, it didn't ruin the play for me because I just got to watch some really good actors and one of the best actors of our time do this material that I love. But it kind of left me kind of cold, where I'm like, you didn't need to do that. And I get it. It's a different medium. Theater is different than film. But just like one of those, or let me revise. You could have done it if you just did the primal forces of nature monologue as is.
Perhaps any amount of workshopping just might not have caught the lightning in the bottle, so to speak, that this movie did, right? And there's something so much to say about that for a movie like this, these sort of movies that we describe as classics, where there's this feeling and there's this vibe, this aura that the movie has in its infinite power, based on what the time and the place, the economy, the government, whatever it is, all these different factors that took place, that were in place at the time that the movie came out, right? And of course the filmmaking itself, but there's a lightning in a bottle kind of feel for a movie like this. And sometimes it's just futile to even try to recapture that in a different medium, right?
Exactly.
It's almost pathetic. But Bryan Cranston, man, I would have loved to see him play Howard Beale.
That was fun. And look, it was, perfect time, perfect place. This
Yeah.
this movie in a lot of respects almost ended that new Hollywood mentality of that deeply cynical film. Because the same year this came out was Rocky, which in a lot of respects kind of renewed that, hey, not every movie needs to end with, the as Quentin Tarantino often puts it, guy fights through Nam only to come home and get shot in a liquor store robbery. That was kind of the mentality of all the new Hollywood films. And this
Right.
film felt like, again, it wasn't the end because the movement carried on pretty much up till 1980, even a little bit beyond that. There was a lot of stuff that happened beforehand, and there was a lot of stuff that happened afterhand, obviously after the fact that
Hmm.
shaped how media is presented and digested too. I think network came at an inflection point in that regard. It wasn't so much that it was prescient, but it was like, hey, this is where it could go. Hopefully it won't.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll all chill the fuck out. Clearly that didn't happen, and for other factors too. It feels like, again, it was less seeing the future and more reading the room, coming to a conclusion, saying, as much great art does, holding the mirror up and saying, "Do you want to act like this?" Of course, the answer to that was yes. Yes, we would like to act like this. This seems like a fun thing to do.
Yes.
And now we're where we're at.
Yes. There's a loss of innocence feel.
Yeah,
And something so prophetic. There's definitely a Fahrenheit 451 like nature to this piece. There are problems in society, right, that we can clearly see, and the artist comes in and says, "Hey, I just put my finger in my mouth and put it out into the wind, and I feel what direction the wind is moving." And I can imagine, because I'm an artist,
mm,
I can imagine very intricately in such detail where that might take us, you know?
sure.
And I don't know, there's always something extremely fascinating about that, because even if you're not correct at all, this kind of satire, no matter how outrageous and how expressionistic and how obscure you get with it, and how distorted everything is, it's still an interesting thought experiment to say these are the factors in play that we have in this arena, let's say media, right? And then you rearrange them and you play this very devilish kind of game with those pieces that are in play. And it causes all of these kinds of conversations, right? Could this happen? I think we have a lot of conversations happening right now in that regard with AI,
Yeah.
right?
Oh
Which
yeah.
I don't think we're going to go into AI in this conversation, but I do think that the conversations right now about AI and the stories that are being penned, like Ex Machina, for example,
Mm.
these types of stories, even Minority Report, that in that regard, those stories could be quite prophetic, and and that conversation is what is started, and that is what's so significant from these works is the conversation, and that, Adam, is what we're going to have right now, okay? Because this podcast is uniquely about meaning, right? So we are going to see what this movie is trying to tell us in retrospect, and I would like to talk about even during the time itself, right? Because those are
Right.
kind of two different topics, right? And right before we get into our log line here to introduce the film, it's just a quick thing for us to think about. I've been talking a lot with colleagues, whether they're part of this podcast or not, even outside of it, about how films start to garner meaning other than they were intended.
I have a theory about that, and that's movies are BYOB, bring your own baggage. You're
Yeah,
bringing your personality, you're bringing your experiences, you're bringing your temperament, whatever you want to call it, you're bringing it to the films in which you watch.
right.
And Network is an example of a lot of people grafted their own, nonsense onto the film, for lack of a better term, and kind of made it something else. And there's a lot of discourse about this film, like there are about great films. And again, you had brought up in our pre conversation, for lack of a better term, You thought this movie was like Fight Club 20 years beforehand.
Hmm.
And it's hard to do a direct comparison because I think this movie's more focused than Fight Club is. But Fight Club, the whole idea of that movie is just primal rage, basically. Where this
Right.
movie feels like a more focused rage.
Right. But rage nonetheless.
But rage nonetheless, yes.
Yeah.
And like Fight Club, this movie, a lot of people go, well, this movie clearly ruined things. I mean, look at the media
Yeah.
landscape. Look at how people like gravitate towards Howard Beale and took away all the wrong lessons.
Right.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. You should have maybe watched the film closer, or
Right.
because I always hate the laziness of like the the film almost taking culpability for people's response to it.
Hmm.
A critic that I really like once said, in regards to people complaining about, Star Wars and what Star Wars did to the culture and what Star Wars did to all this, and he said, it's not so much what Star Wars did to us, but what we did to Star Wars. Here's this like
Mm-hmm.
wonderful little film, the space opera that was made by a very odd fellow that they made some toys, made some merchandise, and all of a sudden it became almost like a religion of itself, and that led to some cult-like attitudes. Now, obviously, Network is not as big as Star Wars, nothing is. But it's still a film that has a lot of resonance and has influenced a lot of people to do
Right.
maybe not so much great things. I mean, look, conservative cable news owes a lot to this film because conservative cable news oftentimes feeds on anger
Sure.
and feeds on rage. It very much perpetuates that. Now, you can make the counter argument that liberal cable news feeds into the self righteousness more than anything else. And I made this joke one time. If you want a comparison between conservative news and liberal news, conservative news sounds like this. You should be angry. My God, this should upset you. Why are you not? It's your God given right to be mad, and you should be mad about this. And if you keep watching, we'll be mad together. Liberal news is you're a good person. You're such a you're watching this show, and this should upset you too. But it should upset you because you're a good person, and only good people watch this network, and you'll stay with us because you're a good person. Bottom line is both of them are telling you to watch their network because they want the ratings, but that's besides the point. There are a lot of films, whether it be Fight Club, Network, pretty much any gangster film ever made, where people do tend to take away the wrong lessons. It's not the movie's fault. And I hate to blame the audience for things because I feel like that's a lazy thing too. But like it's again, bring your own baggage. And sometimes people think it's easy and cool to be mad, even though I think this movie's trying to preach the opposite, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. Hmm.
And we'll get to that.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting rhetorical question. Is it the movie's fault? Right? Is the criticism for the movie's fault? Is the sort of oppositional reaction to the movie's fault? That's a very interesting question. Let's keep that in mind while we do a logline read, because I want to continue on that. The logline for Network is: a television network cynically exploits a deranged former anchor's ravings and revelations about the news media for its own profit, but finds that his message may be difficult to control. And that's kind of the whole. It's one of the overarching, kind of swirling around themes that just kind of paint every moment in this movie for me is that difficulty of control and the impulse to control. Right? There's so much to talk about, but like you said before, is it the movie's fault? Or any movie that causes outrage, or there's some kind of Joker did that not too long ago, right? And is it the movie's fault? Let me throw this question to you, Adam. Is it better to have something to work off of in terms of opposition, like a piece of art, rather than to let all of these negative feelings fester in society until some kind of an incident just sort of arbitrarily causes everyone to start talking about it?
It's a good question. My answer is art oftentimes reflects the times in which it exists.
Yeah.
Network is no different, and obviously we all know about the 70s malaise and all that fun stuff. I'd rather have art be there to provoke a reaction and to inform and enlighten. The issue is, and again, it's an issue because again, like I feel like you keep throwing it back on the audience, and it's not the case because I feel like for every one person that takes the wrong lessons away from this film, there are five that totally understand it.
Yeah.
I would rather those films exist because sometimes things need to be said that other, whether it be authority figures or media or whatever, just can't quite articulate as well. And I
Yeah.
think that film, television, theater, you know, the written word, painting can articulate our feelings better than those forces can. And I'd rather personally have the one person who doesn't get it, so the five people can get it.
Yes. I totally agree. And I think that there's a sort of like laser beam spotlight focus that these kind of satires and stories can have about particular problems, right? These nerves that we can pinch in society and kind of trap the corruption or even the idea of the corruption. Just kind of capture it and just sort of stare at it starkly for everyone to see, right? And then we can talk about it, as opposed to waiting for some kind of, monumental or atrocious event that happens, and then it causes everyone to be thrown into a frenzy, right? And there's some sort of a atrocity or some sort of political attack or whatever, war, whatever it is. But we have these things. We have literature, and this movie works in that literary way, in my opinion, to really break down certain aspects of the changing in society, right? And to tell us commentate about the social fabric and how technology touches that for the better or worse. And because we have something that we can grasp onto, like this movie, which, for example, like from the log line, speaks of cynical exploitation of one of its performers, right? Oh my god, we could talk forever about, say, the entertainment industry, if you can even argue that media belongs in such a label, where that's been a problem, right? Cynically exploiting a performer.
We have to unfortunately like lump in media with entertainment because it's done it to itself.
Yes,
That's how they want to be perceived as. All right, then you're lumped in for better or worse. And in my opinion, for worse.
right. Now, what do you mean by when you say it did it to itself? Because again, part of our log line is that they lose control of the message.
Here's the funny. Yeah,
In other words, because that's quite a question. But in other words, is the message tailored to try to control things, or is the message just sort of this improvised finger into the wind kind of message that kind of creates its own path without any sort of individual control or
in the
corporate
movie,
control?
that's more the case because
Yeah,
Howard is he's literally a raving madman
yeah,
with a serious neurological problem, and he is being exploited. The thing about how media is constructed now, and especially with the advent of cable news and the three major networks, you need to keep people entertained to be engaged in a 24-hour news cycle. It wasn't like back in 1976 where you had, in the movie it's four, but three, networks. You had, the three channels, and that was the extent of it. And you had the news for 1 hour a night, and that was the extent of it.
right,
When CNN launched, there was a hard time for them until I think it was a story where, and I don't have everything in front of me, but I think a child fell down a well and it
hmm,
became a big sensation. And oh my God, something happened, and it kind of turned it into an entertainment as opposed to like a soap opera. That's
right,
literally, they've done soap opera stories about people falling down wells and how are they going to get out. The 24-hour news cycle has done a lot of damage, in my opinion, because you're constantly living in it.
right.
And obviously that cable is pretty much on the way out, and look, you and John, and I advise people to go back listen to the last episode, had a very good conversation about social media, in my
Mm.
opinion.
Yeah,
And I
that's the
did that.
last. That's the
Yeah,
end of the last episode, which is 2.1, Lost in Translation.
correct. And he made a very good point where it's like, hey, if you go on social media, like it's by and large, people just together at events enjoying life. And that's the positive side of it. The negative side of it is you scroll through, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, like again, and there's constant headlines of everything going on. And it's just you feel overwhelmed by it sometimes. And that's the positive is you get to share your life experiences. The negative is you're bombarded with news of all sorts.
Right.
And it's not, for me, that's not a healthy way to live. And
Yeah.
I'll give kind of getting your news from social media or from your phone credit. At least it's written and the written word can still be interpreted differently. Whereas if you watch one of the cable networks, just basically having ideologies shout at you. And
Yeah.
sometimes having very good ideologies.
Yeah. And it is amazing how a lot of what you just said is is part of the script of the film.
Yeah.
It's part of the dialogue of the script of the film.
And it's funny
Right.
too because Sidney Lumet and Patty Chayefsky both started in television. I mean, they were
Mm-hmm.
there like literally when
Yeah.
television was a nascent thing. They
Right.
were there for like when it was like Playhouse 90 and like the General Electric Hour, when it was basically just like 1 hour plays were being done. Like
Yeah.
those two were there at the advent of everything. So I feel like Lumet knew that if the material was great, all you have to do is just back off, lay out, here's the material, and Network is an objectively great script, and Lumet doesn't do anything to overcrowd it. He's not like throwing his own stuff into it. He just here are the performances, here's the story, go.
Right. So I guess it's fair to say that a lot of the meaning and what we get out of this movie is basically born in the mind of Patty Chayefsky.
Correct.
And Sidney Lumet was the director, of course, was basically just a very humble steward,
The conduit
the
in which
conduit. Sure.
and the beautiful thing about this film is it's a lot of people that had I won't say reputations for being difficult. Again, when we talk about difficult, we have to use the old air quotes because difficult often means they had thoughts and opinions and there was some pushback and all that good stuff. But
Yeah.
people that you wouldn't think would get along were humble enough to serve the story. And that's
Hmm.
ultimately what filmmaking is.
Yeah.
Everybody's a cog in the wheel. It doesn't matter how high up, how above the line or below the line you are. And it felt like these were a group of like-minded people who really loved the story, who wanted the story told, and were willing to serve the story and not
Right.
serve their greater interests.
A bunch of people trying to serve the story, and in this case, the story is about a bunch of people trying to serve the numbers and the ratings
Exactly.
and the shares.
And Lumet even pointed that out. Like, this is a movie where there are no creative people involved. It's all the suits. Like,
Well,
yeah,
one could make a damn good argument for Diana being very creative.
you could, but she's ultimately the person that people should be bringing shows to. Like, she's again the don't want to say the head of content because I'm mixed on that word to say the least, but
Right.
that's what her job
Programming.
is. Programming, yes, programming.
Right.
That's the word I was looking
Right.
for. But her job is to basically funnel out the shows and say yay or nay. And yeah, she has ideas of her own. She has a vision for what she wants the network to be. But at the end of the day, she's not in a writer's room with the people every single day creating the show. She's just more there. She might stop by, once a week to be like, "Hey guys, how's it going?" But she's not in the trenches as much. She's definitely more one of the suits than she is one of the creatives, in
Okay.
my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting because I do think that there's very little creativity when we're comparing it to, say, a narrative writer, a writer of fiction, say, right? Because really, what these people are trying to do are they're trying to package nonfiction, right? And then it's strange because once they start to weave that web, the nonfiction, based on how it's packaged, essentially comes out as fiction, right? And I kind of feel like Max Schumacher in the movie, William Holden's character, uh, William Holden's character, he basically makes that argument. It's just very strange to me how how that happens. It's wild.
It's funny this watch I had a different take on that character than I did like in previous watches. It's weird.
What? How
We'll
is
get to
that?
that. I always, you think of him as kind of the one sane man, the one, kind of championing right, staying up for his friend and whatnot. I'm not gonna say he's as big an enabler as Duvall or Faye Dunaway or Ned Beatty, but he still enables. He still has a moment where he could have put a stop to all of this.
Yeah.
And he chose like in a very selfish, mode to, not do anything. So in my opinion,
Yes.
he's just as big a problem, not as big a problem, but he's still a problem, in the story.
Right.
The only pure character is Howard, and he's crazy.
And the movie seems to be perhaps saying maybe the only way that you truly can be free or have some kind of a vested altruistic interest in the truth is to be crazy.
Yes.
Right? Maybe that's the only mode that's allowed for in the network that is society, but especially this network, within the social fabric network. It's very interesting stuff, which brings me to our title take. I want to try and do this quickly if we can, Adam, because I sort of want I want us to talk about the movie as much as possible, the movie itself, and then maybe get some larger takes at the end. Obviously, the title is this one word title that encompasses the entire movie network. But I also just want to get our quick takes on just the sort of surfacey what that title for this movie could mean, and then I'd like us to dive into the scenes of the movie to kind of justify why we think that. So the first thing I want to do is just read, because network is actually it's an ever sort of evolving term, but it's a complicated word. And I hadn't realized how complicated it was until I looked up the definition. And I just want to read a couple definitions of network, and then
Sure.
we can talk about the title. So the ones that I think pertain to the film are something resembling an open work fabric or structure in form or concept. Especially, and here are a few examples, a system of lines or channels that cross or interconnect, like a network of railroads. B, a complex interconnected group or system, like an espionage network. That's more of a perhaps political sort of thing. And C, an extended group of people with similar interests or concerns who interact and remain in informed contact for mutual assistance or support. That's quite a wordy definition. That's only the first definition,
Yeah.
right? And that's sort of more of the social, contextual kind of definition. That certainly applies here, I would say. But then, here are just a couple more of the kind of electronics, definitions. A chain of radio or television broadcasting stations linked by wire or microwave relay. B, a company that produces the programs for these stations. And then a group or system of electronic components and connecting circuitry designed to function in a specific manner. Or, in computers, a system of computers interconnected by telephone wires or other means in order to share information. So, it's very interesting to me because we have this kind of social, non-physical definition, right? And then, among people with some sort of a similar interest. And then there are several physical, real-world, tactile definitions, mostly electronics and radio, television. So, which one do you think applies more to the title? And I think it's needless. I don't even think I have to ask if it's a good title.
I mean, it's a provocative title, and it's, one word titles usually are better off. The fewer words you can use, the better.
Mm-hmm.
I've said that a bunch. I think both kind of apply because yes, it's about a literal like network in a sense of like it's a television channel. You know, you can take the literal take, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot. This is a movie very much about a lot of palace intrigue going on at the network itself, and there are networks of people working within that system to kind of control what comes out. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Networks within networks.
networks within networks, exactly. Kind of the identity of that channel and the messaging of that channel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, judged based on which network of people are running things. You
Right.
know, and that's literally up until, you know, the man at hell speech is obviously the point of no return. But the whole first part of the film is just basically a lot of, you know, between the whole Max and Frank and Diane and all that stuff is basically a wrestle for control of the network itself. You know, networks within networks, as you put it.
Yeah. So it is a very complicated and layered title. And I just think it's fascinating how it encompasses like both the physical like images that are coming to you through the network and the non-physical social aspect and power grabbing within the network that kind of work symbiotically together to create this very fascinating and prophetic story. Let's go right into the opening image and see what we could make of this, Adam. And it's kind of an interesting one because it's what I like to think of as a bookend, right? The very first image is basically the last image also. So let's see if we can quickly make sense of this opening image. And then after that, we're going to go into scenic view, which is where we can jump around to any scene in the movie that we want to make our point or to discuss a topic. Just to summarize, the first thing that we see are 4 television sets in each of the 4 quadrants of the screen. They're all news anchors, talking heads, and they're just droning on. And we zoom in on Howard Beale, who's on the bottom right one. He's just kind of talking, and there's a sort of non-diegetic narrator voice that says, "This is the story," in that nice 70s voice, "This is the story," or "This story is about Howard Beale, who was the next anchorman on UBS TV," etc. And basically he was a big gun in the industry. He had a high rating until 1969. His rating slipped. That next year, after his rating slipped, his wife died. And then he began to drink, and he was isolated. And suddenly he was a childless widow. And then in 1975, which is basically the time of the movie, around the time, he was fired. And then they say that the news was broken by Max Schumacher, which is his kind of old-time friend, played by William Holden. And the president of the news division at UBS is who he plays. He says, the old friends got properly pissed. So they're kind of drunk. And the next image is an establishing shot of New York City at night. I think it's 6th Avenue, I believe. And Max and Howard basically have a conversation on the street. They're laughing at Max's story about rushing to the George Washington Bridge all these years ago in the Golden Age. And he's mistaken for a suicidal nut by a cabbie who's taking him to the bridge. And they laugh hysterically about it. And then we cut to a bar, 2-shot, where we've got this implication that it was just the news that Howard was fired was just broken to Howard. Howard is just kind of like face down on the bar, and he has this regretful. Max has this regretful face, and Howard says, "I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to blow my brains out right on the air, right in the middle of the 7 o'clock news." And then Max kind of just goes along with it, saying, "You'd get a hell of a rating, right? 50-50 share, I bet. I'll guarantee you that." Max kind of goes along with this for just a bit, and then his mind wanders, and he says, "Oh, you could make suicide of the week, execution of the week, terrorist of the week." And he starts just doing this thought experiment of creating these diabolical shows. And the two of them kind of brainstorm together, him and Howard, to sort of cope with this. And then they're just talking about how great of a Sunday night show it would be for the whole family. And then I would say that this ends with the last line, which is Max Schumacher saying, "It would wipe fucking Disney right off the air." Oh my
Um,
goodness.
a lot to
What do
unpack
you?
there.
Yeah, there is. But what do you think are the most important aspects as to the regarding the meaning of the entire movie opening up here?
Going back to the log line, the cynicism is right there, and cynicism is very much the
Hmm.
canvas in which this film paints on.
Right.
Look, it starts off with that funny story about somebody mistaking a suicide, and then pivoting right to a guy contemplating suicide. It's like what I said. Like, I had a lot more thoughts on the Max character, and it kind of starts here where the death hour and him kind of going through all the homicide of the week, the suicide of the week, the terrorist of the week. For the guy who's supposed to be like the grand old man of news, and he was there with Ed Murrow, and there at the
Right.
beginning of news, and he's the guy who is the news director. His job is to supervise the news. A lot of what the American people feel is kind of articulated through the news, and a lot like what it is today, it feels like the news is mostly negative. He's the guy who kind
Hmm.
of controls what's being reported in a
Right.
lot of respects. And he's kind of playing into it, even in a joking fashion, but he's playing into it in a way that you think to himself, like, wait a minute, is he kind of, again, not responsible for Howard's condition? Howard at the end of the day is responsible for Howard, but
Yes.
for the guy who, as the film progresses, kind of tries to take the ride the high horse, as it were, about journalistic integrity, and my God, we can't be doing this. He's manifestly irresponsible, and all that good stuff. At the end of the day, like, he was kind of patient one as far as like Howard's early signs of cracking up.
Hmm.
Because imagine having to go on the air every night and reporting all this stuff over and over and over again. Again,
Yeah.
eventually cynicism gives way to madness in that sense.
Yes.
And I thought about this opening scene, going like, he's kind of feeding into it in a way that maybe a friend, like, again, if you have a friend that's saying that they're going to kill themselves, your first response, I mean, granted, his first response is, "Ah, shit, Howard." Like, he's probably heard this a couple of times already.
Yes. Hmm.
But your first response shouldn't be, haha, isn't this just a regular old thing? Again, like I said, I have a lot of thoughts on the Max character.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, I find it fascinating here how Chayefsky, the writer, of course, he kind of like you were talking about with cynicism, which I think is a key word here,
Hmm.
but how he introduces this idea of the not necessarily the everyman, because these people are, they're on a pedestal, literally sitting there talking to the entire nation, but but the working man who's part of a corporation, part of a company. He's saying something about how there's this existential problem where once you feel like you don't have anything to lose, like you are expendable, right? Howard has worked at this company for however many years, right? Decades.
They said, I think it was 11 was what
Yeah,
was
that's
cited as
true.
correct.
11 with that network. That's right. I think that Chayefsky as a it's a very interesting opening that deals with the ultimate irony of the movie here, right? That we're
Hmm.
talking about these two people that are joking about once Howard, who now realizes he has nothing to lose and starts talking about these absurdities, and then Max doing this thought exercise because he's sort of empathizing with Howard and doing this kind of mental, exercise of imagining the hypothetical of if he had nothing to lose, if he
Hmm.
could put anything on the air, right? This if scenario, and what we get are these absurdities that start out as so absurd that they're as laughable, say, as the joke that he just told Howard in the previous scene,
Correct.
right? And I think that's what Chayefsky's getting at here. Like, oh, we're just laughing and we're having a good time. We're shooting the shit. We're just talking absurdities and laughing at life and
Right.
talking about how these things that seem to be trivial in life, once we start to hone in on them and talk about them, they make us laugh
But it's all
because we
fun
can
and
make
yeah,
it's all fun
it,
and games,
it's
right?
all fun games till somebody loses an eye.
Yeah. until the network turns the red light on, right?
Exactly.
So, what an awesome opening to this movie. And then, of course, dovetailing very nicely with the end. And by nicely, I mean terrifyingly.
Oh yeah.
And we'll get into that once we get into the end. But yeah, something to think about. And again, just such a great bookend kind of an experience here. All right, so Adam, I just remember as we were talking about this in our pre-chat, you were so excited to talk about so many monologues and moments in this movie that have become such a, paradigm in and of itself. So take us to one of these. Take us to one of these monologues that you love so much, and we'll talk about it.
Do you want to get the big one out of the way first? Do you want to get the Man of Hell speech out of the way first?
Yes. I'm, precocious as hell for the mad as hell speech. Let's do it.
So in a script this good with these many wonderful speeches, in a lot of respects, I think I've always felt this one was simultaneously incredibly overrated, yet underrated in its subtlety. Because at the end of the day, it's all just boiled down to a catchphrase. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore, which is
Yeah.
echoed throughout the film and is basically them taking this man's anger and anguish and angst and boiling it down to a catchphrase, which is literally the point. Literally the point of the whole speech. It's also the one in which, like I said previously, the anger being misdirected. It starts off with him basically saying, I don't need to tell you things are bad because they are, and I don't know how to tell you how to fix things because I have no earthly idea how.
Yeah.
The only thing I know is that you have to get mad. You have to say, my life has value, god damn it. I'm a human being. You have to get up now, go to the windows and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. There's a small moment in the speech that this time around I cackled at because
Okay.
because it undercuts the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows the inherent problem with directionless anger. Where after he gets up and he's yelling to the camera, you have to say I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore, and then we'll worry about the inflation and the depression
Yeah.
and then we'll address our problem. But we have to be mad first about it. But then we'll discuss how we can fix our issues. And of course, at least from what we see and from what we know of history,
Right.
they never get discussed. Just people get mad for the sake of being mad.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that speech frustrates me is because it feels like the movie, for a lot of people who've seen this film, the film ends there. That is the climax and the end of the film. And that
Yeah.
was almost like the inverse of, or not the inverse, it was the exact opposite of what Lumet and Chayefsky, I think, wanted to say with this film.
Hmm.
I think people did get mad as hell and they weren't going to take it anymore, but they weren't going to address the problems. They were just going to be mad about the fact that there were problems. And I
Right.
think that that's a big part of what's going on now. And I think it's a big problem with human beings by and large. And look, before I say anything further, I'm just as guilty of this as anybody else.
Right.
It's
Me
very
too.
easy to identify the problems. It's very easy to be mad at the problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing entirely to address the problems and fix the problems properly.
Well said.
And I'm trying not to say trying even anymore because I feel like it's a matter of doing and not trying.
Mm.
But I'm attempting to gain the requisite skills to fix those problems in
Right.
life, as opposed to just the world's fucked up. What are you gonna do?
Right.
Which is very much what the attitude is of people who hear this speech. It's the ultimate. Well, he's saying what I'm feeling, so I'm going to graft myself onto the speech and just the world shit, and that's it. And there's nothing I can do about it. No, there's stuff you can do about it if you engage with the problems that he's talking about, and not just with the catchphrase.
Yeah.
And I think Lumet got that. I think Chayefsky got that. I think Peter Finch got that. The actor playing Howard Beale.
Yeah.
I don't think the audience got that, or at least segments of the audience didn't get that. They
Right.
gravitated to the speech, they held on, and then they turned the movie off going, all right, yeah, there's another like hour left, but yeah, who cares? I got what I wanted out of the film.
Yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, well said. And there's a lot to talk about that branches off of that. But the thing that keeps coming to mind for me is this entire project of the network exploiting this man, and the fact that intentions matter, right? Intentions, incentives. Uh, the intentions of Howard are, I think, quite nebulous. I think that he just, like you said, it's anger for the sake of anger. It's being angry at the fact that he's angry, right? And I don't know exactly what the intention of the Howard character is there, other than to, let's say, maybe be heard, right? Because he's
Yeah.
also psychotic at this point.
And
He's just
he's
starting his psychosis.
and you
Yeah.
can also argue that he's literally crying out for help.
Yes, that
For
could be another.
anybody, yeah,
Yeah.
to anybody to help him. And look at this point in the story, his so-called best friend has been removed from his position, but
Yeah.
also his best friend hasn't, apart from the I'm going to try to take you off, I'm going to try to get you, but it feels like he's not doing enough. You can argue,
Yeah.
and maybe he's just not able to. And look, not everybody is capable of handling somebody with trauma and somebody with a neurological disorder in their life. It's possibly just not built for it. But you know to jump back into the script a bit, there is a moment that Max has that he could have ended this entire thing. It was when Howard, after his first meltdown, begs to pretty much just let me go back on the air and let me go out the right way.
Right.
And then Howard goes on, and then he just starts ranting about how he ran out of bullshit. And
Yeah.
there's a moment where the director in the room goes, all right, cut him off, and Max is like, leave him on, because he got into a pissy match with Frank and Ruddy and those guys about them basically trying to take over his division, and he goes off like a petulant child, and he says nope, and he uses Howard for his own ends to kind
Right.
of let out his. And again, that's not the act of a true friend.
Yeah.
He would have basically put, the second that he said bullshit, he would have been like, nope, you're done.
Yeah, that actually factors into, what I was going to say was the just to draw this disparity between the intentions, however sort of cryptic they are, of Howard, to try to compare that with or contrast it against the intentions of the network, right? Of the different people inside the network. Basically, you have this collective idea in the network, which I'm kind of excluding Howard from at this point because he's practically insane and he's technically fired, and they're only kind of keeping him to just exploit him. But the intentions of the network are essentially to make the most money they can, the most profit, right? Via good ratings, okay? Making the shareholders and the affiliates happy, okay? And it's very interesting to me because Max is caught in the middle of this. And I think that it's just sort of indicative of the network corrupting the intentions of the people that make up the network, right? And they're all just sort of throwing their hands up, and they're pledging allegiance to Jensen, or to the man, to the profit motive. But you have Howard, who clearly needs all of this help, and Max knows that, and he's very righteous about it, I think, at the beginning. But you're right, it's not the act of a true friend. Max's intentions become similar, I think, to Howard's when he is embarrassed at the affiliates, the stockholders meeting, right? Like you said. And he becomes a sort of version of Howard when that happens. Because of, and we knew that from the opening, Max had this in him, right? He had that kind of jaded sense of what's going on in him. And then when it ultimately happens to him, he thinks he's going to get fired, or he's just so mad that he doesn't care if he's going to get fired. He goes into nothing to lose mode. And he acts carelessly against the best wishes of his superiors, right, against the president, to engage in a whatever the what is it, Ruddy, that guy's name?
Yeah, the guy who
Yeah.
basically is the in charge of the network.
Yes. Whatever Ruddy said about that. I forget what he said, but it's like some endangered
You
the network with a weird something act or something.
was done like you basically you acted like a petulant child, and
Right.
you perpetuated the stunt, and
Right. A
basically
stunt.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, you're basically you're not tenable here. I can't protect you. I would look if you had waited for another day.
Right.
I would have had your back, and everything would have been fine, and you would have been satisfied, and Hackett would have been satisfied, and we would all been good. But you
Right.
acted this way and made things worse.
Right. But to me, we've got like a human Venn diagram here, or a character Venn diagram. Right. On one side, you have Howard, who represents just this very human character that's in need of a lot of help, and he's not in his right mind and doesn't know what his intentions are. It's said in the script that he's not responsible for himself, right? So you have that going on, and he has specific needs and is in need of care and treatment. And then on the other side of the Venn diagram, you have essentially Jensen, right? Or a lot of these higher ups. You've got Jensen, you've got Hackett, you've got Ruddy, all of these guys that represent the profit motive of the network and how that has to be completely unflinching and intractable, right? And it's just cold, hard calculation, and those are the intentions of those characters, of those people, if you can even call them people, right? And then you have where those two bubbles kind of somehow meet because they have to interact with each other. You have this character, Max Schumacher, who needs to be some kind of a referee of sorts, a decision maker, right? He has the understanding of what the news is and what the profit motive is. He wants, he wants it to be successful. Especially that's why he's so disturbed when the conference happens and he's kind of given away as being, the head of this division in the network that's failing, right? He cares. He cares about being successful here. And he cares about, carrying on some sort of legacy or whatever. But at the same time, he's also very sympathetic for his friend, Howard. And he's caught between these forces. The forces of, hey, this is a human being in need of help, and the forces of, hey, this is your job, this is corporatism, this is your livelihood, right? I mean, this is sort of old as time itself, or old as humanity itself, right? And that's what I see Max as, and that's why I love that character, because he's constantly in the middle of this tug of war between the traditional and the new, the sort of business entrepreneurial class versus the let's get mad as hell together sort of everyman kind of class. He sees both, and he's seduced quite literally by the Diana character. He's ultimately, I think, seduced and subdued into giving in to the new way of things, the new idea, the new ideal of creating whatever kind of content that you can in order to get that profit up and at whoever's expense. I think he does kind of fall in love with the idea, which is the incarnate Diana.
It's hard to say, and I don't want to just paint Diana. Look, Faye Dunaway gives a phenomenal performance.
Oh
She's an
my goodness,
actor who I
yes.
feel like gets
Oh,
by her own admission and by a lot of things. Like, there's a reason why she kind of burnt out quickly as a movie star. But I don't want to just
mm-hmm.
boil that whole character down to that section of the film, because I
Right.
think that she plays a much more intricate part in the film.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I think it's an infatuation more than it is a romance on Max's part.
Yeah.
I think he's. God, I'm trying to think about it. Like the whole TV incarnate thing.
Hmm.
which I think is a cheap dig, but I did think about it quite a bit. And I also think about their first scene together where she goes to visit him after hours to kind of pitch him some ideas as to like how we can make the news more entertaining.
Yeah.
And she confides that like, she had when he gave a lecture at the University of Missouri that she had, as she put it,
Yeah.
a childish schoolgirl crush on him for a matter of months.
Great scene.
In a lot of respects, and I watched the whole documentary about Sidney Lumet, and he pointed out, Oedipus Rex being one of those plays that which he was there for the first viewing of it,
Yeah.
when Oedipus takes his eyes out, and there's something edible about that relationship
Hmm.
because, like I said, Max was somebody who was there at the beginning of television. He was there for the creation of it. So in a lot of respects, Diane is kind of his daughter in a sense of he had a hand in creating her and shaping her personality,
Yes.
directly or indirectly. So it's almost like Frankenstein trying to have a romantic relationship with the creature.
Hmm.
Not knowing that the creature really isn't, and I hate calling that character a creature because it feels, derogatory and it's not meant to be.
Right.
But by that same token, and this is how Dunaway was told to play the part. Like, there's really nothing there. She's been hollowed out from years of kind of these pursuits and
Yeah.
putting her job first and foremost and feeling inept at everything else she does in life except for her work. She's good at her work, but as a result, there's nothing left in there as a person.
Hmm.
And I think that that's the thing. It feels like Max is literally trying to have a relationship with television itself. Now, do I think that he's completely innocent and Diane is, the one that needs to be taken down a couple pegs? I think they're both accountable
Oh, sure.
for not
Hmm.
only the direction television has gone, but for Diana's condition, basically.
So I got an interesting question for you here. Yeah, I think that just to preface it, I do think that that scene is really, really, it's spicy, it's interesting when it culminates into Max basically telling her, Diana, you are television incarnate, right?
Mm.
And he has this another incredible monologue. I'm just listening to this thing thinking, oh, all the wisdom of the modern world and the shifting world is in this monologue. It's incredible. But one of the things, if you notice, Adam, that he says to Diana, he doesn't just tell her that she's television incarnate. He says she is madness. Of course, justifying it by saying things like war, death, destruction, right? Whatever it is, he said all of these things are just kind of, it's boiled down into the rubble of banality, or whatever he says. You're not really saying anything. You are like television. You are madness, Diana. And I
Right.
gotta ask you, Adam, in from the perspective of the movie, is Diana madness or is Howard madness, or are they both? Is there a distinction?
I think the madness is in both of them, in both Howard and in Diana. Though Howard is more overt, and Diana slowly starts to lose it as the movie progresses. And there's
Mm.
during that whole speech, there's a little throwaway line where Max tells her, "Listen, in 18 months' time, you're probably going to end up throwing yourself out of the 14th story of your office."
Yeah.
And Dunaway does a thing where she goes into the kitchen to get a teacup, and she's literally trembling,
Yeah.
and you can tell like it's starting to really start to wear on her. And again, my thoughts on Max can be kind of concluded now because it culminates in this scene. I again, the whole relationship is very meta, and it uses very meta dialogue throughout it. Like
Right.
them talking about kind of like how almost like how Diana scripted out the relationship.
Right. I'm becoming one of your scripts, Diana.
Exactly. He even acknowledged it before the relationship in the scene with Beatrice Straight
Yeah.
when he's breaking up with his wife. He's like, there's a version of the story. It's like a made for TV Anna Karenina.
That's right. Don't worry, honey. Every plot that Diana has conceived of leads to me returning back to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there is almost like a part of me that wishes in that scene after the TV incarnate thing, because again of Max's place in the film, of his background, of everything there, it's almost like he went like, I'm sorry. I almost had a hand in instilling this madness in you. And for that, I feel deep regret because of who you could have been, but you are who you are, and I gotta back off. I
Right.
kind of want a little bit of culpability from him in that sense. Because it's not like the movie does paint as black and white, and it's not. And that's the beautiful thing about movies of this time. There's no overtly likable character. Everybody's deeply flawed, but
Yeah.
infinitely interesting. Infinitely
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And
And
isn't that just people?
yeah, exactly. And the only pure character is Howard. He's
How
pure in
so?
his,
How is he pure?
he's pure in a sense of he's unfiltered. And again, like a lot of that pureness comes from his own madness, and that's sad in a lot of respects.
Right.
But it's almost like he has no machinations. He's not trying to manipulate anything. He's not trying to take a moral stance of sorts.
Or he's not a
Even,
phony, as Holden Caulfield might have designated it.
for lack of a better term, yes. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, because he's unfettered, he has no ties to reality anymore. He's gone completely insane. He's free to just say whatever he wants.
Right. But are his utterances reflective of reality?
Of his reality,
Are they
perhaps.
coherent? Do they have do they have some kind of a share or a take that makes sense in our shared reality that we all experience?
I think the monologue he has after the man is hell, the one immediately after, when they've now
Hmm.
redone the set and now it's more of an entertainment show, a variety show even.
Right.
When he literally like has the whole diatribe about, television and how, we're the illusion, you people are real. So for God's sake, just turn off your televisions, go to God, go to Guru, go to yourselves. And he's basically pleading for humanity. I feel like that part is pure, and
Hmm.
that part is also the least angry he is for the rest of the film, almost.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
in an odd way, this is like his last bastion of hope, and then I think the next speech he gives is when they're trying to acquire the company, and he has the whole diatribe. Because I watched the video before this,
Uh-huh.
before we watched, and they made a point of like Howard kind of showing his limitations as a person because he doesn't so much have a problem with the fact that CCA is going to be acquired, and this is the second to last monologue he gives. The CCA deal and who is this company, and they're we're being bought up by the Saudi Arabians, and it's a fear not that his company's being acquired, but it's people who aren't American that are acquiring. There's an
Yeah.
otherness, and that's something that's a little bit uncomfortable, but something that people are afraid of. They're afraid of the other. They're afraid of us becoming less American, for lack of a better term.
Hmm.
And that, to me, is the speech that breaks everybody's illusions about Howard's show, and it's when everything starts to start falling apart. And it's out of xenophobia,
Hmm.
really. It's him
Yeah.
kind of at his angriest, at his lowest point, where it's a speech about television and how we're the illusion and you people are the real thing. That's the point where it feels like he's completely gone, because
Sure.
that message clearly fell on deaf ears. So you know what? I'm just gonna get angrier.
Yeah. And of course, that speech about the Saudis does lead us into what you refer to as the greatest monologue, perhaps, of all cinema.
Oh
But
yeah.
before we get there, I just want to push back a little bit and ask some interesting rhetorical questions about Howard here, because I do think that there is truth and reality in almost everything that Howard says, right? Like you said, whether it has some sort of a like political or social justification or justice end in mind, and whether those ends are nefarious or not, there's something that he taps into that is very close to reality, because for most people reality is perception, right? And what these people that are tuning into this show have perceived or felt is perfectly articulated by Howard, or at least enough so in order to get them to congregate, almost like a religion, right?
Mm.
Now, is it really possible to say that it doesn't have to do with reality if he's getting such a congregation of people together, right? If it's going through the airwaves into the television, into the ears of real life people in reality that don't live in a studio or are part of a show, families like Schumacher's family in their apartment, right, in New York City, and it causes them to go out of the window, to stick their heads out the window, and to shout at the top of their lungs their favorite tagline because a nerve has been tripped. And then you notice that hundreds of voices are acknowledging the reality, let's say, or acknowledging some sort of emotional tipping point that these words are laying out. Is that not, contending with reality?
I believe it is, but it's a distorted form of reality. And if you want, we can jump to
Mm-hmm.
Howard's last speech to kind of show that, where after he's been given the dressing down from Jensen, and now he's going to do the whole thing about how the individual is basically dead.
Mm-hmm.
And he made some valid points, but the message was thoroughly depressing, and that kind of led to everything.
Right.
It's easy to rant and rave about stuff like that, about the death of the individual and
Yeah.
how we're all becoming humanoid. We're not human, but we're basically humanoid. It's easy to have that take.
Yeah.
Very easy. And I think to a certain mind, yes, that's where we're all headed. And at times it does feel like that. But I do think that there is something that is a problem dealing with absolutes,
Mm-hmm.
which I think Howard does do from time to time. And what a person with such an angry worldview and with a collapsing worldview often feels
Mm-hmm.
is that it's one way or the other. And that's something where, to his reality, yes. To Jansen's reality, yes. To Diana's reality, to Frank's, again, everybody's reality. To your point, reality is oftentimes based on perception, and somebody else's perception, especially people who control the media in that sense, can project that onto others and get them to follow along with it.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think, though, that that's where we're headed? No, because I think we're pushing back on that and going, well, wait a minute. You brought up AI, for example, earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there has been, in some spheres, there's been an acceptance. In other spheres, there's been, no, we don't want this. You're like, no, like this is as far as like we're willing to go.
Right, but even
And
if we don't want the results, let's say, even if we don't want what ends up resulting from Howard's dialogue, isn't that dialogue still born of a perception of the world that tracks with how the world really is? That's how it's affecting people at all, even if it's very cynical.
I think it's somebody trying to bring the reality, trying to manifest the reality
Mm-hmm.
through their words, which is easy when you have a microphone.
Right.
It's easy when you have look. It's weird now because now everybody has a platform. Everybody. I often joke I have Instagram to tell people about film festivals, and I have Facebook to piss in the ocean. Yeah,
Yeah. Now
but
anyone can be a mad prophet of the airwaves.
exactly. So it's weird in that sense, but still, some platforms are bigger than others. Some people have more followers. Some people have more, Facebook friends. Some people they have a network news show like Howard does. And they can take their reality and try to manifest it and make it reality for everybody else.
Right.
And not everybody's willing to accept the same reality. Aaron Sorkin, who is a writer I respect a lot,
Mm,
Did a show called The Newsroom, which I think is very underrated
mm.
and is the one that I feel like people kind of sleep on.
Yeah, Jeff Daniels, right?
Jeff Daniels, terrific show. And there's a speech given. It's Sam Waterston and Jane Fonda. They have a back and forth in one in the first season. I forget what episode.
Hmm.
But there's a
I've
moment
heard
that
about this. I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about this. I know what you're talking about.
and Sam Morrison says, it's true. People choose the news that they want, and Jane Fonda shoots back. People choose the facts they want,
Right.
and that's where we're at now. Where we're so that part is true that we're so segmented that people aren't choosing. They're not looking at the news or the world objectively in this way. It's like they're looking at subjectively, and they're choosing the world in which they want to live. That part freaks me out, but that's also, I think, people trying to manifest their own realities.
Sure. Do you think that this movie, if it even touches this, does it subscribe to there being a shared reality at all? Or is it saying that reality itself is identified only by the personal, like you said, creation of reality, broadcast from the television or from media at large?
It's hard to say because this movie was meant to satire, because I think in everybody's minds, like, this would never happen.
Yeah,
Of course not. This is like patently a response. Like, no, there's no way. Ha ha, isn't this funny? And the issue became, the prophecy came true.
yeah,
And it became kind of the suits trying to control the narrative, trying to control what people think. And people like thinking in narratives. We, especially, you and I enjoy thinking in narratives because how many movies do we watch?
right.
How much media do we, engage with? And people will eventually try to look for narratives in every aspect of life, whether it's founded or unfounded. So they'll bring somebody out and they'll say, no, no, this is how it is. And they'll present it as fact. And they'll present it as that. And you go, well, this guy, he's wearing a suit and he's on television. He seems smart. What he's saying must be true.
Right.
Even if it's an entertainment.
So I guess it's fair to say that this movie teaches us a huge lesson, even if it's purely satirical, at least in intention, about how it is that you view what's coming out of the news, right? And what's
Correct.
coming out of the constructed narrative, whether it's intended to be a fictitious narrative or whether it's supposed to be purported to be actual the news, what's happening out there in reality. But getting it, how it is that we take that in and how it is that we filter it. Is there a character in here that thinks for themselves? Because I think that would have to be Max.
Diana kind of does, even if her thinking is kind of wrongheaded. And I guess we can kind of transition to talking about, because we haven't spoken about them yet, the ecumenical liberation army.
Right.
And again, it's the left-wing militant group that ultimately kind of sells out their principles in a lot of respects. Like, these are the
Oh
people
yeah.
that should be the free thinkers.
Right.
And it just shows that eventually somebody will come knock on your door and say, here's a bag of money. Sell us your principles, sell us your ideology.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, they're reduced to nothing more than hired guns, literally at the end of the film.
Right.
The
Yeah.
hell with their ideology. Hey, we gave you a television program, so you'll do our bidding, basically.
Right.
They just nod and they go, okay, what to do? Shit like
Exactly. And what a great segue, because a certain character that we're about to talk about basically says to Howard, there are no such thing as ideologies anymore.
that. Correct.
Right? And that is, we could talk about the ecumenical, but you just laid it out so perfectly. That's basically what I believe, is that they're supposed to be detailing, is the entire justification for Jensen saying that at the end, right? That there is no such thing as ideology anymore. It's a college of corporations, right?
Right.
So, if you don't mind, Adam, we've talked about most of Howard's rants at this point, and what they mean and what they don't mean, and is there a reality to them, and what is reality, and so on. Well, Adam, the whole damn movie seems to culminate in, in this unbelievable, audacious, daring, and eyebrow-raising monologue. I'd like to ask you, just to start off, what is it that because we talk about meaning here, and to me, especially someone like you, who's very intellectual about these movies in the best possible way, in order for you to tell me that this is one of the best, with a capital B, monologues in cinematic history, what is it that qualifies it to be that? I'd like you to answer that simple question for all of us listening, and then we'll go into the monologue itself.
It's one of these. Look, it's purely Ned Beatty's performance. As great as the speech itself is, Ned Beatty was the perfect casting. He is
Mm-hmm.
one of the greatest character actors ever. The man could literally do anything. He can be funny, he can be scary, he could be innocent, he could be
Mm-hmm.
so many things across the board. And this felt like a speech that he was born to give. And he
Yeah.
plays it like that. And the fact that it goes from, again, the how I led off this podcast, just how big and how scary and how imposing he seems, and then as he's like seething and you will atone, and in half a second he literally goes, "Am I getting through you, Mr. Beale?" Like he goes from this raving lunatic to just like calm, and he's back to being reserved. And even when he's a raving lunatic, it's funny because he's this big guy. He's being, you're a man who thinks in terms of nations. There are no nations. There are no peoples. And that's the funny part. And then he gets deadly quiet. And that's
Mm-hmm.
the part that he starts saying then when he is being quiet and very docile and saying that the countries of the world are basically these corporations, which I think remains true to the same, even though some of those companies are now defunct, but new companies have kind of risen up to take their place.
Right.
That part is then the horrifying truth of it all. And I know it's about, perceptions and realities and trying to control it. For me, this is the part for me where I gravitate and I bring my own baggage to it.
Mm.
Because I do believe in a lot of respects what Jensen is saying has come to pass. Depressingly has come to pass. And Andrew, you know this, and anybody who knows me knows this, I often wear a t-shirt that says gleeful pessimist.
Yeah, it's also your
And
Instagram handle now.
it's also my Instagram handle now. I'm leaning into, always be branding, right?
Yeah.
Look, there's a whole other story, but a lot of that sentiment comes from that speech, or a lot of that, that phrase comes from that speech. Where
Wow.
I know, as a species and as a culture, as a world, at least from our vantage point in our generation and our kids and our kids' kids, we're fucked. The toothpaste is out of the tube. It's done because we have chosen this to be our reality. The world should be run as a business, and it doesn't matter how many people have to get hurt, how many people have to be cut down. This is the reality we chose. The gleeful part of that is acknowledging that fact, but still choosing to live your life, to still find those moments of joy, and to still, make the most of it with the people you surround yourself with. Is find the joy in the hopelessness.
Which is interesting because that's similar to what Max says to Diana as he goes out the door.
Right.
As long
And
as I can still feel pain and pleasure,
exactly.
Keep my humanity intact.
That the first time I heard that speech, in a lot of respects, it was like the first time I heard George Carlin, where I'm like, my God, somebody's actually saying what I've always felt, but I've never felt it.
Sure.
Again,
Yeah.
bringing my own baggage and grafting my own sensibility onto the film. See, guys, I'm not a hypocrite. I do it too. I do it. I do it way too much sometimes. But it stopped me in my tracks. I think I had to literally pause the film and like get up and just like take a walk after the first time I had heard that speech.
Yeah, interesting. So basically, you were just kind of like entranced by this speech where someone was articulating all of these deep, like festering philosophical realities that you saw in the world that you live in, and that just like caused a real emotional impact on you.
Correct.
Would
And
you say that that's what's happening to the audience when they hear Howard Beale?
no, I think they're rejecting that to some degree because they don't want to believe it. It's
They don't want to believe what Howard Beale, but do they believe what Howard Beale is saying?
I don't think so because all of a sudden now
Hmm.
it goes from, again, it's fun to be angry. It's fun to latch on and do the groupthink thing. And all of a sudden now he's saying something that they're like, well, wait a minute, you said my life had value, and what the hell? No, this isn't how should be, and this isn't like what
Right.
I want my reality to be. How fucking dare you? And that's when the slide starts to happen because it's the truth they don't want to hear. And it's the George Costanza logic. It's not a lie if you believe it, and that's how a lot of people
Yeah.
choose to live their lives. It's, you know, everything I believe is the truth, and everything I don't believe is a lie.
Right. Yeah.
And this is a very tough and bitter pill to swallow. Like, again, not in the sense that, and I'm trying not to make it sound like overly depressing or overly like how intrinsically fucked we are, but like this is the path we chose. We've been before, this is how post-war America wanted to be, to pretty much run everything as if it were a business. And that leads to a sense of the death of the individual, which I think isn't really the case, but a lot of people do,
Including Howard at the end,
including Howard,
and
especially, yeah,
including Jensen, who's basically telling him to
who's
preach
basically
this corporate cosmology,
yeah,
as he's saying.
who's
Yeah.
basically cheerleading it. It's like,
Right.
again, I've chosen you, Howard Beale, to preach. This is his evangel. This
Right.
is how he thinks the world should be.
Right.
Unfortunately, because it feels like the rest of everybody turned the movie off after the Man is Hell speech, and they didn't get to hear this speech, that they're like, well, wait a minute, I don't think the world should be run that way, or I don't think that.
So maybe they don't believe it after they hear the depressing stuff they don't want to hear. But wouldn't you agree that they certainly believe or subscribe to the tenets that he's saying in every moment before that? That's why they congregate to go to the show. That's why they stick their head out the window and scream, "I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore."
Right, because now it's almost like he's asking his audience to engage.
Right.
And this is Howard's equivalent to jumping the shark.
Right.
It's the
And that,
one step too far.
yeah. But I'm just wondering because Howard has a reaction during his back to this monologue with Jensen. Howard has that kind of a similar reaction to you, right? And kind of a similar reaction to Howard's audience when Howard starts to do what he's doing.
I
Right?
think the difference between me and Howard is Howard wants to go and actually preach the evangel. I would just find a cabin in the woods in the middle of nowhere and just be like, nope, I'm just gonna live my life. Live my life. I'm gonna find the joy that I have because you guys have
Yeah.
won. You're gonna destroy everything that I hold dear. I'm just gonna hope and pray that something like Starfleet comes along in the next 200 years and we as a civilization can, carry
Right.
on. But like in my lifetime, we're fucked. So thank you guys for that. I'm just gonna live my life. You
Right.
guys do whatever you want to yourselves. I'm good.
Well, I guess my first question to you is, does Jensen out Howard?
No, I think because he finally, again, because he literally starts the whole thing with like some people say can sell anything. He talks about how he's a salesman, basically.
Yes.
So I think and not so much Howard's Howard is he literally takes advantage of a man who's mentally ill
Yeah.
and kind of puts the words in his mouth, basically. And
Mm-hmm.
something that, again, because the movie is very good about this, it doesn't quite tell you whether or not, who's the voice that Howard is talking to at various points of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's, was it Jensen the entire time? Was it, this kind of mythic force? Was it just all in his head the entire time? And this is the part of the film where it gets blurred a bit.
Yeah.
So literally up to the because you're on TV, dummy, 65 million people watch you, which was
Right.
said earlier in the film and that Jensen reiterates.
Right. Which was said ostensibly by God.
Yes.
Right. And of course, Jensen is taking on the God role. And I love how they do that with lighting and so on. Like he has a halo light and his key light is very low, and it's just astonishing how that mood is. And of course, the line, like, to reiterate what we did jokingly at the beginning of the episode, I think I've seen the face of God, and he says, "I think you may have actually."
But even then, like with the halo lighting, but then by the time he's literally at Howard, it's almost like he's completely obstructed by darkness.
Right, but that's when there is a halo light on him.
That's true.
Still, it's just a halo light. It's like he's a faceless, dwarfing, big, mysterious, godlike figure, right? But with a halo light, some sort of. And Howard, Peter Finch's performance is incredible, which won him the Oscar posthumously, strangely, but
unfortunately,
yeah, I know. But Peter Finch's reaction to that is very similar to his reaction in bed when he's apparently spoken to by God.
Right.
Right?
It's pretty much like exact.
Right. So there's brilliant match there. It
is, and that's sign of good filmmaking is know where everything was beforehand and then set up payoff. That's just, again, Sidney Lumet literally wrote the book on filmmaking.
Right. And it brings up this question that the movie brings up of, what actually is God? I mean, it's amazing that this movie brings up all of these like foundational philosophical questions. But, what is reality? Reality versus perception, right?
Exactly.
What is God? The problem of evil. I mean, there's so many things that the movie brings up. But that moment, like you said, that connects back to that other moment, what actually is God? For all intents and purposes, I am God, says Jensen.
Right, and and again, why I think the film was better than the play is because the play made that text where still in the film it's subtext, and you don't really quite know.
I think there's definitely enough there, though, to make it.
There's enough there to make the argument.
Pretty much
there's
text.
Absolutely enough there to make the argument.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
I think that's what matters.
Yeah, but it's also your like I said, your take on it. Where was it Jensen the entire time, or was it just he's literally like everybody else, like Diana, like Frank, like Max to a lesser degree? Is he just another guy in a long line of people with their own motives preying on a feeble man?
Yeah. These are astonishing questions, and unfortunately, folks, we can't answer them outright for you. We can tell you what we think, but this is a movie that is an experience. And it's not just an experience in and of itself. It's a movie that challenges you to think about your own life and take on life based on your own experience. Right? We've all heard a lot of ideology. We've all heard a lot of arguments. We've seen a lot of media. We're constantly seeing media, right? But this movie really challenges you to put all of that stuff together and make your own, like Howard says, don't let yourself die as an individual, right? This movie is challenging you as an individual to make your own opinion about what all of these questions amount to, what your answers would be. And the movie gives you the tools in a very satirical, metaphorical way, but it gives you the tools that you need to, have some kind of a story or some kind of a vessel to challenge you to find what your own views on all this stuff are. And I just love all these things that are put in play, Adam, like Jensen at the end here. The only other thing I want to ask you, Adam, about this Jensen monologue is he has this, one of the most striking things about the monologue to me is near the end, like you said, where he gets really quiet and he starts walking up in this hushed voice to Howard. He starts talking about basically like a utopia.
Yeah.
That part where he says, one day, I'm paraphrasing, but one day there will basically be like this utopian corporation The entire world will be one sort of cosmopolitan corporation. It will run perfectly, right? Everyone will have a share. Every man, and it's implied woman and child, will be able to enjoy the benefits of that corporation, right? He's basically preaching this is the way to the utopia, the society that we all want, the world peace, the world order. What do you think he's actually saying there through the metaphor of him being God and him preaching that money basically makes the world go round, as the saying goes?
I mean, look, one man's utopia is another man's dystopia.
Sure.
It's his literal evangel, as he tells Howard. Like, it's literally, this is what he believes the world should be.
It's the end game.
It's the end game. This is what the ultimate, where he wants to be, where it's like, we're all, just all employees under one umbrella,
Mm-hmm.
where we all work for the common goal, which, again, there's some things about that do sound nice. There's a difference between communism and socialism. Socialism,
Mm-hmm.
as it was said in the movie Mank, socialism is controlled by the people. Communism is controlled by no. Look, here's the actual quote. Communism, everybody shares the poverty. Socialism, everybody shares the wealth.
Mm-hmm.
In an odd way for a movie that, again, he's literally, citing the Russians is not too dissimilar to us, where it's all driven by finances on their end too. They just have a different mode of economics. He is kind of describing communism to some degree,
Yeah.
where it's, yeah, sure, this seems all utopian, everybody's kind of, but notice how he said everybody has one share of stock.
Right.
Who has the rest of the shares of stock? Who
Right.
has the control over the boredom killing, machine, all, boredom neutralized. Yeah, basically everybody's a subservient employee at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Where he, Arthur Jensen, it's a utopia for him because he's the one controlling everything.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody still has to live within that system, and it sounds to me like an oppressive system. And sadly, it's a system that I think we live in today, where it feels like just everybody's in, wanting to feel some sense of peace. And I don't need to tell everybody right now that in the year 2024, we've probably had, from June up to now, the most intense 6 weeks of news that you can possibly have.
Right.
And people feel like they want to be bored once again. Bernie
Yeah.
Sanders on television said, politics are meant to be boring, not supposed to be this engaging, for
Right.
lack of a better term. They're supposed to kind of be just like in the background, but now
Yeah.
it's because of how media presents it, it's kind of a spectator sport.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it boils down to that. This is Jensen's idea of utopia. This is his evangel. He's going to use his network and his anchor to kind of preach that and
Right.
get that message out there. And wouldn't it be great and wonderful in 1976, where people were still very much free thinking and, like all good Americans, kind of bathing in their own cynicism, they could reject that. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know, because for the love of God, Kid Rock just played the RNC, and I'm still like, wow, it's just basically one big monster truck rally at these days.
Yeah. So that is a really astonishing idea that Jensen basically preaches communism by way of capitalism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which, look, I think that both systems are heavily flawed, and I think the collapse of the Soviet Union showed that communism is flawed, and I think we're living in the days where we're now seeing capitalism is a wonderful economic system when everybody has money. And when everybody doesn't have money, it could be great for a few and shitty for a lot of other people.
Yeah. All right. So we just covered a lot of ground. That was awesome. So many interesting ideas there. I'd like to go to the closing, Adam, and close this thing out. I'm going to briefly summarize this in case anyone hasn't seen the movie in a while. I consider the closing to start where the UBS team, which is Diana and Frank and the affiliates and higher ups, they have this sort of diabolical meeting where they assess this conundrum that they have that Howard is tanking ratings at this point. But Jensen wants him to preach his corporate cosmology, right? So he won't take him off the air. Jensen will not take him off the air, and he's intractable on that. And then the team here decides that they just have to kill him. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is Diana saying, "Look, I don't see why we have any option, Frank. Let's kill the son of a bitch."
Mm.
So then we cut to this audience being put together in the studio, this good audience for the assassination of Howard Beale. And of course, they say, the host said, or the narrator says, "How do you feel?" The MC, and the audience screams their favorite tagline: "We're mad as hell, and we're not going to take it anymore." Basically, the intro. And they introduce the other segments in the variety show, and then the mad prophet of the airwaves, Howard Beale. Okay, so before Howard can even say anything, there's a tiny little moment of silence, and then, bam, two terrorists stand up out from the audience. They draw rifles and shoot Howard right then and there. He falls down to the floor dead. There's a little moment of silence as the cameras sort of move up toward him and get that close-up as he lies bleeding on the floor. The audience doesn't really seem to stir for that moment. Then we cut to this bookend shot of the 4 TV screens in the 4 corners of the screen, just like the opening, and we hear the news story about Howard being killed and other news stories kind of droning on in the background. And the background stories kind of fade in louder, and they're now heard equally as loud as Howard's story. And so now we have these 4 TV screens going, and one of them is about Howard's story, but there's a kind of hodgepodge of stories and jingles and images, and none with any more importance, it seems, or prominence than any of the others. So the TV images all freeze, and the sound cuts out. And the narrator has this final line: "This was the story of Howard Beale, the first known instance of a man who was killed because he had lousy ratings." And then we're back to the droning TV sounds, and one final bottom left TV set is frozen on an image of dead Howard on the floor, all bloody, along with the title "Network" in the middle of the screen. And then the news reports continue to drone through the credits, and then a medley of news theme music throughout the credits. All right, well, I gotta go over to you again, Adam, because tell us why there's a bookend here, what the movie's trying to say, and if you can get anything out of this closing as a kind of final takeaway from the whole movie, wrap it up for us. Why the bookend, and why is this in your top 3?
Well, I'll start with obviously the bookend. I mean, it's a good parallel. Obviously, the 4 screens. I feel a little bit of melancholy knowing that Peter Finch was going to be dead by the time he was going to receive his Oscar, and he dies at the end of this film. This is obviously, I think, the most like satirical part of the film, because obviously nobody's been killed yet for their ratings. But it's funny because it feels like the entire film they're trying to find a way to get rid of Howard. They try to force him into retirement at the beginning of the film. They hourly fire him, a couple times during the film. And it's almost like he will not go away. He is a problem that will not go away. And this is, obviously then him getting the Jensen endorsement, which I think Frank was banking on, like, okay, well, like Jensen, he'll see reason, he'll take him up. And it turns out Jensen's a fan and sees him as a useful tool. And it undercuts, that network of people's ambitions for what should be on the air, because it's literally killing their network, their television network. So they decide, all right, the ultimate way to get rid of somebody, you kill them. And again, that's the one part of the film that is still satirical because it's yet to come to pass, but
Or so we know of.
Or so we know of. But like, I forget the woman's name, but there actually was an instance of a news anchor down Florida around this time who committed suicide on the air. And anybody who knows can look
Wow.
that up. And it was kind of not exactly inspiration for the film, but obviously, again, it boils down to, if you keep reading depression keep reading depressing stories over and over again. It's every night of your life. That's going to take a toll on you. And it did this woman whose name I apologize, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a popular story. I encourage anybody to go out and do more research than I did beforehand.
Right.
As far as why this film is so important to me, again, my top 3 films of all time are Die Hard, which is my turnkey film. It's the film that made me want to make movies.
Mm-hmm.
Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is probably the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life, and one of the most, again, transformative films I've ever
Mm-hmm.
seen in my life. And if you can see on the big screen, by all means. And for everybody's belly aching about, oh, it won all too many Oscars, fucking whatever. The thing's going to hold up.
Mm-hmm.
I stand by that, and
Mm-hmm.
give it 10 years. This film, look, we talked a lot about cynicism,
Yeah.
and I'm a big believer in that it's good to have a healthy cynicism. It is. It's good to question things. It's not good to always take things at face value.
Yeah.
Which I'm trying to do a bit more because I think that's just healthier. But then again, maybe it isn't. But this movie helped kind of develop that cynicism in a lot of respects.
Mm-hmm.
And you can talk about the wonderful script. You can talk about the fact that this movie won 3 acting performance, 3 acting Oscars. The fact that
Yeah.
Sidney Lumet, and I think the reason why, and look, Lumet, there was a documentary made about Billy Wilder called The Portrait of a 60% Perfect Man. And I don't think that appeals to Wilder, but it does appeal to Lumet. Lumet made a lot of movies. He made arguably the greatest debut film of all time, which is 12 Angry Men.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a long career, and there were peaks and valleys. And he also
Yeah.
wasn't a guy that was known for his visual stylization, other than, the subject matter, because he always kind of made the same kind of angry social dramas. There's really only a couple of deviations from that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he didn't do genre as much. He did, like, Murder in the Orient Express is the closest he came to genre. And then he did The Wiz, which was a musical, but that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of pigeonholed himself there, and therefore, like, you talk about guys like Brian De Palma, who I love, who is the definition of a very flashy director. And here's everything I'm doing, and it's me because I'm doing all these tricks. Lumet didn't have any tricks.
So then why is the film that important to you?
Because it also shows the true meaning of collaboration. Sidney Lumet was not bigger than the film.
Right.
Patty Chayefsky, though he's affiliated with this film, is not bigger than the film. Faye Dunaway, who gives a phenomenal performance, and I feel like we've done her something of a disservice by not talking about her as much in that performance.
Yeah.
Because it really incredible and big. And I know that people kind of go back and forth on the kind of performances they love. I love a big performance.
Yeah, me too.
Because at the end of the day, film is an illusion. I don't want, and not that, again, realism when captured correctly, it can be just as awe-inspiring and beautiful. But at the end of the day, I love the illusion. I love playing to the illusion.
Yeah.
And she was definitely a bigger actor, and that mode was starting to get phased out a bit. Fortunately, she did win the Oscar here, and quickly, unfortunately, kind of unraveled due to her own mental health problems, alcoholism, and then, unfortunately, a very big swing and a miss in Mommy Dearest, even though I do enjoy that film immensely.
Mm-hmm.
But it did kind of ruin her career.
And I think there's a documentary on Max called Faye that properly talks about all of this stuff.
And also there's a documentary called By Sidney Lumet on Prime right now that I watched ahead of this that gives you a good idea of the director. So yeah, some supplemental material for everybody to consider while watching this, after listening to this podcast. But I digress further. It's not about, Peter Finch or William Holden or Beatrice Straight. It's not about just the cinematography or the editing, both of which were brilliant, the production design. Filmmaking is the reason it's the most collaborative medium. Music is collaborative, but there is a limited amount of people involved. Film, it could be as little as 5. It could be as much as 5,000. and everybody has their own little part to play in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other examples of this too, like Silence of the Lambs, which I hope one day we do get to talk about, that I feel like does fall into that category. Die Hard is
Yeah.
another one where it feels like everybody's operating at the height of their powers.
Right.
And it all coalesces into this perfect film. And Network is that too. It's everybody in the cast and behind the scenes, and the director and the writer and the producers at the height of their power, at the best they ever were, coming together and making this beautiful, insane, frustrating thing that I'm jealous of to some degree. I think every filmmaker should be jealous of this film, because it's not like this was a film that was born out of a cosmic universe of creativity. This was very much, again, reflecting reality back at itself.
Yeah.
Literally ripped from the headlines, as it were, even, fortunately or unfortunately in this case.
Yeah.
But that's why it's one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah.
That, and I feel like I did take away some, unlike Die Hard, which, again, film I love, but I never really took anything away from the film other than I want to make movies and this looks fun.
Sure. Yeah, I think we all have those. Us film junkies, filmmakers.
I took away from Everything Everywhere, and I took away from Network. The movie left me with something. This film almost told me in a way, like, be careful about how cynical you can be, because eventually cynicism will eat you whole.
Yeah.
And yeah, in so many words, that's why it's my third favorite film of all time.
Wow. And like you told me in our pre-chat, this film lives rent-free in your head at all times.
Oh yeah, absolutely. not a day will go by where I don't at least think about a scene from this film.
Yeah, and that's a great shift into what I was going to say. I have many takes on this film, actually, right? I mean, I think it depends on, like, the day, how you wake up in the morning, you watch the movie, and you're going to think it's about mostly one thing or something else. You eat a different breakfast, and then you go watch the movie than the day before, and it changes how you think about the movie. But that's a testament to all the different colors of the movie. But yeah, I was going to say a big one here that I always think about is not just cynicism as its palette, but the theme of the entire problem of cynicism. The fact that it exists as a mentality, and the problem of it, kind of like the problem of evil, as an entire sort of like overarching philosophical theme or topic. This being jaded, this feeling of distrust, a feeling of that the ideas that you've been given are not in good faith somehow, right? A negativity that's born from that. Distrust of integrity of the people around you, of the motives of others, right? It's so easy in this world to either preach to yourself or listen to someone else fearmonger and preach to you about the many aspects of discontent in the world, right? They're all around us, everywhere. And I think about this all the time. And there's so many disparities between the haves and the have-nots, and the fortunate and the unfortunate, the misfortunes of others, poverty, filth, etc., right? Atrocities, war. But this film seems to take all of those sort of points and ideas that belong to the problem of cynicism, and they compress them into a new studio, into this small world of this little movie. A little movie meaning that the plot is very contained, but it's a gigantic movie in terms of what it has to say about, like you said, why the problem of cynicism needs to be not ignored, but it needs to be tempered and controlled for yourself, because, like you said, it could eat you alive. And I think that that's what this movie is saying. It's saying someone as previously innocent and yet not perfect as Howard Beale, this character, getting something pulled away from him that gave him meaning in his own life, his career, right? That's the purpose. Any of us anyone listening to this, either of us, me or Adam, anyone in the world, can have that sense of purpose pulled from them at any given moment in life, right? And when that happens, we're vulnerable in a very particular kind of way. And it's a scary thing. It's existential dread, right, when that happens. What is the meaning of my life? What is the purpose now? And the beautiful thing about this movie is that it says that it can happen to any of us. Any of the individuals that Howard is preaching about. Or even if they're humanoids, in quotations, right? And they're not individuals. Anyone in any circumstance. And this movie says, again, Howard can devolve so easily in his own kind of jungle that is his job, the media, all of these figures that surround him. It just keeps eating away at him. The way Adam just told us he wants to avoid it eating away at him. It just keeps on devolving for Howard into a culmination of him getting killed by the system which he pledged his allegiance to, right? The very thing that he devoted his meaning in his life to ended up destroying him. In every way a person can be destroyed. And also, like Adam aptly said earlier in the episode, there is this opportunity for his best friend, at least his best friend that we know of, that's kind of in that same world, Max Schumacher, to just end all of this. But he didn't. Because he was trapped in his own sort of cynicism vortex, right? And it spirals out of control. The movie is, like it's advertised to be, perfectly outrageous. Prepare yourself for a perfectly outrageous motion picture. Well, yes, what happens in the plot is outrageous. But what's not outrageous, and it's very possible for all of us, is to be caught in this kind of spiral, this vortex of existential dread, of cynicism. And yeah, this movie is prophetic in that it is a warning. It is an ultimate warning. So serious of a warning. I always think of that image of Jensen speaking down with such dominance to Howard about this, about how serious this is. This movie is doing that to us. And it's telling us, hey, all of the stuff that Howard said, all the good stuff, but especially don't lose sight of who the hell you are as an individual. And that there's so much more to the world than how you're getting it in that news package, or how you're getting it from that social media post, or that outlet, or that article. Okay? Read everything. Be bigger than just the one lens that you're hearing and seeing things through. Like the movie succeeds, like Adam said, in being bigger than any of its original individual parts. I think all of these things are preached to us. And I think it's masterful. And it doesn't leave my head either. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal movie. And I really do think that this ending, this assassination, is the final nail in the coffin of just anyone who's succumbing to just basically being Diana at the end of the movie. This is what becomes of you. So what a movie this is. And I have many questions just to ask the world through the lens of this movie. But I boiled it down to one, guys. My fan question for this movie is, what do you guys think is it that makes this movie so incredibly timeless? I mean, I would argue that Lumet made a lot of really great films. Like Adam said, there are peaks and valleys in his career. But I mean, you look at Dog Day Afternoon, Serpico, 12 Angry Men. I mean, it's incredible. The list goes on. But this movie, I think I would argue, is probably his most timeless. And we talk a lot about timelessness of movies on here because it makes the meaning constantly relevant. And it makes them so fruitful for us to watch. So, it's a very difficult question to answer, but what do you guys think? What is it that makes this movie, and movies in general, but particularly this movie, so timeless? So that's our time. I think we could probably talk about this movie for 2 days, let alone 2 hours, Adam. But I just want to thank you so much for joining us. And you're always a source of inspiration for us in terms of how we watch movies, how we think about movies, what we get from them, and how we can articulate that to everyone. So I would really like to thank you for joining us again and going through all of this in such detail with us with magnificent fervor. And please continue to come on the podcast and grace us with your wisdom. Thank you once again, buddy, for coming on the podcast and discussing that work.
Just because he'll kill me if he doesn't. I have agreed that if you guys ever do burning on the podcast, Mr. Bewley has suggested that I kind of play a referee between the two of you. So just know that I'll just be there, if anything, as a moderator for that debate. Let me put it that way.
That's burning.
But yeah, I always love coming on. And just a couple things, if I could plug, Don't Eat Dead Fish, my short film, will be coming to the Columbia, Maryland Film Festival on September 9th. And my previous short, The Killer Across the Street, will be playing at the Brightside Tavern 10th anniversary show on August 10th. So a couple little plugs.
That's great. Yeah, Brightside Tavern, Jersey City. That's a fun place.
Because we're all filmmakers here, right?
We are, and proudly so. And no, that's great to hear. This burning thing, I will never hear the end of burning. At this point, I think I've just been, my hands are tied. I have to do this debate just because I will never hear the end of it. Speaking of spirals of cynicism and existential chaos and dread. But I think, Adam, you would make an amazing referee. And I have good faith in that. So I will definitely think about it. You guys tell me, what do you think about us doing me versus John Bewley in an absolute cage match, discussing how he thinks it's one of the best movies ever. I think it's one of the most pointless and worst movies I've seen in quite a while, at least, the South Korean film. So, yeah, but thanks again, Adam, for coming on. And thank you all for listening. And please comment, if you can, share the podcast, if you can, on whatever outlets you may be obliged to do that. And I would really appreciate that. So please like, follow, comment, subscribe, get the word out about Speaking Cinema, and on any of these major platforms. I would really appreciate it. And again, thanks for joining us. And we have a great time every time with you. We hope that you have a great time with us. I'll see you on the next episode.